philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose, and by extension promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of humans, animals, and the environment. Now, maybe you've heard that promoting veganism is classist, right? Because there are places in the world where you can't be vegan, right? Like if you're an Inuit living way up in the north, you couldn't survive on a plant-based diet on your own up there. So let's look at that a little more closely. Does the situation of the person on the left justify what the people on the right are doing? Or is the real classism choosing, when you have a choice, a diet that requires more land, more energy, more water, and more violence? And while increasing the chance that people in places like Bangladesh and the Marshall Islands and Florida may find themselves having to immigrate to somewhere else, possibly within the lifetimes of some of us in this room, because of rising sea levels. And it's quite possible that collectively, our diet could make the difference about whether we cause mass migrations so great that they look that they make the migrations of Syrian refugees look small. That could be from the choices we're making about what to put on our plate. And you know, it's actually very inexpensive to eat a healthy whole foods plant-based diet. The book Eat Vegan on $4 a day makes the case rather poignantly. But when you think about it, these foods I show on here, these are some of the cheapest foods in the grocery store. And they can be the basis for a very satisfying diet. And there's a growing number of elite athletes now that are finding that when they switch to a vegan diet, they are setting some of their personal best records. That's Carl Lewis, Olympic champion in the lower corner there. He was already about 40 years old, at the end of his career when he switched to being vegan, and he set his personal best time ever after he became vegan. Now, the same way of eating would eliminate over 90% of deaths from our #1 killer, heart disease. It's been shown to reverse diabetes in Native Americans right now. It would significantly reduce the incidence of cancer. It would slow the growth of antibiotic resistance, because most antibiotics are being used in farm animals. And it would reduce the emergence of new infectious diseases. Do you know that almost every infectious disease that has ever plagued humanity, do you know where it came from? It came from our use and exploitation of other beings. If we left them alone, almost every disease that's ever been of significance would never have spread through human populations. We create them by interfering with animals. So the single biggest thing that we can each do to have a positive impact is to shift to a plant-based diet, and when you do that, a whole world of colorful, flavorful, delicious options shows up. It is not a diet of deprivation. But I want to point out, it is not the economics that make this have such an impact. The biggest benefit, although economics does play a role, the biggest benefit of us making this shift is the ripple effect it has in our communities, our networks, our churches, our schools. Because when one person wakes up from this culturally taught desensitization to this huge injustice, it starts to wake other people up. It plants seeds. We have our greatest ability to influence others just by the example that we set. But I want to be clear about something. Veganism is not a diet, and it is not about food. This is a social justice movement. And it's about practicing nonviolence 3 times a day. Fundamentally, it is about love. And I have a website, joannefarb.com, where you can find lots of additional information to back up everything that I have said here. There's free videos and downloads and articles. You can read my article, Is Free Speech Dead in Lawrence, Kansas?, where I talk a little bit more about the situation that I've encountered here. And, you know, we all get to make the choice. Do we want to support oppression and violence, or justice and compassion? Thank you. Yes?
2 questions. Is there any reason that a plant-based diet and an animal-based diet could not coexist, like at the Merck? Other than political ideology, is there any good reason that they could not coexist?
So let me reframe that for you. Let's say you're working for Amnesty International, and you want to, you've been working to get better treatment of political prisoners. Is there any reason why you couldn't have no political prisoners alongside humane treatment of political prisoners?
I don't think the analogy holds.
For me, it does.
Okay.
Because when so I realize change doesn't happen overnight, and I am more than willing to see baby steps in the right direction, which would mean they might be side by side until enough people become persuaded that they don't need to have that stuff. Certainly. I mean, as a starting point, yes, those could be side by side. But why participate in any unnecessary violence against other creatures? Why do that if we have other options?
Well, right. It depends on how the underlying depends on the underlying politics, as far as I'm concerned. What about the shift from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet? Should that be gradual? Does someone need help to do that so that they?
So there's a million different ways that people accomplish that, and I've seen the full gamut. And I think it's pretty individual. For some people, they see the information, and like for me, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm done. And I shifted in a moment. The evidence does suggest that most people who shift more gradually do better at keeping the change. And I don't know how much of that is that some people who make the shift are just very emotionally reactive people. So they have an emotion, they make a change, but principle doesn't hold them. They have another emotion, a week later, and they're somewhere else. I mean, I don't know if it's just reflecting that difference or what, but I would say whatever works for an individual. So some people say breakfast is a really easy meal to go completely plant-based. So some people might say, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be plant-based for breakfast every day. And then 2 weeks after that, they say, okay, now I'm going to add lunch. Lunch will be plant-based every day. And then after they've done that, then they say, okay, now dinner. I'm done. There's a million different ways people can do it, and I've got links to all kinds of helpful things on my website. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes?
I was surprised to learn a couple of things along the way. People use the word empathy and think it's been around forever. It has not been around forever. I think it's just something around 100 years that it's been in use.
That term, empathy.
Yes. But that suggests to me that compassion was still around way back when. We talked about the compassion of Christ. So that's a disconnect that I had never seen or read about. But that also suggested to me that maybe we are just now, and it does, for any kind of major change, it takes decades on anything you're talking about. Energy. I've seen in The Economist that there'll never be a time we do not use wood for an energy source. But slowly and surely, the other forms of energy are coming online and taking a little bit away from wood, but not that much, even after a decade. If you're really honest, God didn't set up the planet correctly. He wouldn't have allowed so many of us to be here. Every problem goes back to population overload. I've been through that mentally so many times. And then a Canadian theologian, Presbyterian by background, identified that in the hierarchy of life, humans are first, animals are either second or less. And this was...
That has been the prevailing human perspective.
Yes,
through most Western
but
civilization.
it's been supported by the church,
That is true.
like Christianity.
But not everybody supports that today, and people are starting
no,
to
I
shift
know
in that
that.
view.
But it's a lot to overcome.
Right, the Earth was the center of the universe, too. About empathy, I do want to add something. Ethologists have written quite eloquently on witnessing empathy in various other species.
Oh, sure.
And it does appear to be very adaptive for lots of species, because without empathy, empathy is the glue, even without the word having been defined, the behavior of being empathetic to other individuals is part of the glue that lets communities of organisms survive and function well together. So even before the word empathy may have been there, the behavior was clearly happening in many times and many places and with many
And
species.
that's what gave rise to the word.
Yeah.
But it took us centuries, thousands of years to see it.
Well, but we've had the golden rule. Isn't that empathy too? The idea of the golden rule, that's been around for a long time. That's empathy.
Maybe.
Thank you.
As a human race, we don't do very well.
You better go to your appointment.
So one question.
Yes.
I understand the animal rights, human rights, animal rights. How about the plants' rights? Plants.
So he's asking about plants. What about plants' rights? And so this is an issue that some people raise a lot. Most of the time, though, and I don't think you're doing this, but most of the time when people raise this issue, I get the feeling that they're looking for a way to wiggle out of having to be concerned about animals. They're looking to undermine this. But in fact, there is evidence that plants, there's something going on with plants. But from an evolutionary perspective, plants do not seem to feel. They don't have a nervous system. There would be no evolutionary advantage for plants to actually experience pain because they can't use that to get away and increase their survival. Pain for an animal is adaptive because if something causes us pain, we try to get away from it. But plants can't move. And clearly, though, if you
The
really...
article says, some.
I know there's been I've seen it, but so let me just ask you this.
It's a pain, painful. They
you
feel pain.
I want you to imagine two things. I want you to imagine somebody bending down and yanking a carrot out of the ground and taking a bite from it. And I want you to imagine somebody grabbing a rabbit and picking it up and hitting it on the ground a few times and poking it with their fist. Do you have the same reaction to each of those?
No. It's good.
That
But
would
just
be-
same thing.
And we have to live off of plants. Right now we don't know anyway, but it's clear we can live really good lives not hurting animals.
Yeah, plant doesn't
we can widen-
move. Plant doesn't cry, but plants feel it.
Well, we don't know. We don't actually know.
Yeah,
It's
some
possible.
Paper says it's pain. They feel pain.
They don't have the same neurotransmitters.
Different, but it's a pain. Different pain.
Yeah, we don't really know.
What is the primary motivation for someone to move towards a vegetarian or vegan diet that has nothing to do with animals?
So let me just clarify. Yeah, so you can say vegan diet or plant-based diet. That's different than veganism. I want to be really clear. Veganism is an ethical principle, and it's a social justice movement. And it's become so popular now, and so many stars doing it, that the term has gotten a confusing usage, and people don't understand. But you did say vegan diet, so I will address that. I would say of the people I meet who have not been motivated to go plant-based for ethical reasons, probably the leading thing is cardiovascular disease. Because there's now been so much good published science showing people who have basically been given up for as hopeless by their cardiologists. They can't have another stent, they can't have any more bypasses, pull up your rocking chair, there's nothing else we can do for you. Those people have been able to switch to a plant-based diet and live another 20 years just fine. In fact, most of the people in the original study are still going, and it's more than 20 years. And these have been duplicated. Ornish did the first studies, and people say, well, we don't know that that's just diet because they were meditating too. And then Esselstyn came along and wrote Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. He's got the website Heart Attack Proof. And he showed, nope, I didn't have people meditate. I didn't even have them exercise. I just had them eat the plant-based diet. And guess what? Everybody who stuck to the diet had no more cardiovascular events compared to the control group of people who defected, and they continued to have a lot of incidents. And then more recently, you've got Joel Fuhrman. His fabulous book just came out. It's The End of Heart Disease. The library just got a copy. This is the best book yet. And he has shown, because it was thought it was the low fatness of the plant-based diet, because these were also very low fat diets with no oil. But now he's pointing to data showing no, it's not just the low fatness, because you can, as long as that fat isn't really high, and it's things like nuts and seeds, whole plant foods, they're still getting reversal of cardiovascular disease. So you don't even have to go super low fat. The main issue of fat is if people need to lose weight too, it's so calorically dense. That's when you have to limit fat. So I would say cardiovascular disease is top. The second would be prostate cancer. Huge research now showing that you can just most prostate cancer, you can just stop it from growing by getting animal protein out of your diet and eating healthfully. And the other thing that's really new is Ornish's group now has shown that telomeres, you heard of telomeres? The end caps, so in our cells we have DNA, and the end caps of the chromosomes are called telomeres. And every time the cells reproduce, they shorten a little bit. And telomeres control the ultimate lifespan of a cell. And we know that turtles, for example, they're long-lived, have really long telomeres, and mice have really short telomeres. And up until recently, it was thought nothing reversed that they just continually shortened. Now we have research showing that when people switch to a plant-based diet, they can actually lengthen their telomeres. And that was unheard of before. So we've got all these different lines of evidence. You know, people do it for their health, they do it for longevity, they do it, a lot of chronic diseases, a lot of inflammation. Animal protein is so pro-inflammatory. The fats in animal fats are pro-inflammatory. The gut microbiome is heavily influenced by whether we eat plants or animals, and when we eat animals, the gut microbiome becomes one that upregulates inflammation in the body. I mean, there's like a million different mechanisms that are becoming clear now.
What's the best book out there to help someone frame a vegan diet?
Probably a lot of Joel Fuhrman's work was my favorite. Now he's not specifically vegan, he's just on health. So he does say things like if you're just looking at the health aspect, I think he's got the best science-based information. And he actually says it's not necessary to be 100% plant-based as long as it's extremely small amounts, very infrequently, of animal foods. He thinks the science is not there to say that even the tiniest amount every once in a great while will ruin you health-wise. He won't say that. So I wouldn't say he's vegan, he's a vegan author, but he can help you get to a healthy plant-based diet really well.
His name again is?
Fuhrman. And I've also got a lot of free documentaries and YouTubes you can link to from my resources page on my website. And I also have some information for you here. I'll let you each take one of these, and I've got more I'll put up here. So, are there any other questions?
Well, my goal at my ripe old age has been a long time. The word moderation's always meant quite a bit to me, and it's been overcome with another word called modesty. And then right along, I try to be more and more intelligent, so I make better and better choices. And I think I've pretty well gone down the pike. But I also understand that we've got a huge overpopulation of people, and it's sucking the life out of the planet. And we should be primarily worried about losing our planet for habitable life.
No, I agree.
And I'm not kidding, it's getting really, we're right on the edge again. I preached on the survival of the planet Earth during Lent, clear back in 1976.
Wow.
That series, just updated a little bit, would fit right now. Then they thought we'd be lucky to have the planet not just come apart by the year 2001. So that movement at that time started people thinking all over the planet. There are small groups all over the planet that are taking a stand and making a difference. And they're buying us some time, but the clock's still ticking. And we really, really have to be very self-conscious about our choices and how we spend every dollar, how we do everything to stop the collision from happening.
I agree.
So,
You know, if any of you are affiliated with other groups and you'd like to share my presentation with them, I'd be happy to speak other places, so.
well, my wife has a PEO group, and the women have more power over food than anyone else.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.